At 6:12 a.m. on July 27, 1944, Flight Lieutenant John G. Jack Rogers taxied his aircraft toward the far end of runway 3 at RAF Manston. The morning haze hung low over the English Channel, turning the horizon into a dull, silver blur. To his left and right, ground crews in dark coveralls stood frozen, hands on chocks, faces pale with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The plane Rogers was about to fly did not sound like anything they had ever heard. No steady hum of piston engines, no cough of exhaust, only a deep, vibrating howl that shook the ground like thunder trapped inside a tunnel. It was Britain's first operational jet fighter, the Gloucester Meteor Mk. And it carried no guns. For 5 years of war, the Royal Air Force had fought the Luftwaffe with the same basic tools: Spitfires and Hurricanes, Merlin and Griffin engines, the thrum of propellers against wind. But in 1944, the air war was changing faster than anyone could follow. Across the Channel, German engineers at Peenemünde had unleashed a new weapon, the V-1 flying bomb, a pilotless pulse-jet missile that roared across the night sky at 400 miles per hour. Its engine sputtered, then cut out before impact. Londoners had learned that when the sound stopped, the explosion came next. In June and July alone, more than 4,000 V-1 South fell on southern England. Thousands were dead, tens of thousands injured. Anti-aircraft guns and Spitfire patrols tried to intercept them, but the V-1 South flew too fast, too low, and too unpredictably. The Air Ministry needed something new, something faster than any piston engine could deliver. That something sat on Manston's runway, shaking the tarmac. Rogers glanced over his shoulder. Two men in white coats, engineers from Power Jets Limited, stood behind the blast screen, clipboards pressed to their chests. One of them, a quiet man with sharp features and oil stains up to his elbows, gave a thumbs up. That was Frank Whittle, the inventor of the turbojet engine. The project had nearly been buried by bureaucracy for a decade, dismissed as impractical, extravagant, and dangerous. Now it was Britain's last hope against Hitler's vengeance weapons. Rogers eased the throttles forward. The twin Rolls-Royce WTB-23 Welland engines screamed to full thrust. The Meteor began to move, gathering speed down the wet concrete. The acceleration was brutal, not the smooth climb of a propeller-driven Spitfire, but a raw, continuous shove in the spine. No torque, no prop wash, no vibration. Just speed. At 6:14 a.m., the Meteor lifted off. It climbed through 2,000 feet in seconds. Rogers pushed the nose down slightly, leveling off over the coast. His radio crackled. Control to Rogers. Radar contact confirmed. Target approaching from southeast. Altitude 1,500 feet. Speed 410. The first V-1 flying bomb was already inbound. On paper, the Meteor's top speed was 415 miles per hour, just enough to catch a V-1, but only barely. The jet had no mounted weapons yet. Its 20mm Hispano cannons had been removed for calibration issues that jammed under recoil. But the attacks couldn't wait. The Air Ministry ordered the Meteors to fly anyway, unarmed, to see if they could even keep up with the German bombs. Rogers spotted it ahead, a small black dart leaving a dirty orange flame. The V-1's pulse jet engine beat like a mechanical heart, firing 50 times a second. At full power, it moved faster than anything he had ever chased. He pushed the throttles forward to maximum thrust. The Meteor surged. The landscape blurred. The engine noise rose from a scream to a roar that pressed against the cockpit glass. At 8,000 feet over the Channel, he was catching it, slowly, painfully, foot by foot. Control, I have visual on the pilotless aircraft. Closing in. The plan, if one could call it that, was simple and insane. Tippett. RAF pilots had learned that the V-1's gyroscopic stabilizer could be thrown off by a wingtip nudge. Touching the edge of the bomb's stubby wing with your own could flip it over, sending it crashing harmlessly into open fields or sea. It was a game of inches. A mistake meant fire and death. Rogers lined up alongside the V-1, barely 10 feet away. The blast from its exhaust shook his canopy. He nudged the stick gently right. The Meteor's wing met the V-1's fin. A sharp metallic shudder. The missile wobbled once, twice, then rolled inverted. Rogers pulled back and banked left. Seconds later, the V-1 plunged into the channel and exploded in a column of water 200 feet high. "Splash one," he said quietly into the radio dot at the operations trailer. Whittle removed his headset and smiled for the first time in days. Against every prediction, against the skepticism of almost the entire RAF staff, a wooden-framed jet without guns had just destroyed Germany's most advanced weapon. That morning, Rogers landed after 23 minutes of flight. Ground crewmen swarmed the aircraft, touching the fuselage like it was a relic. One mechanic said he could still feel the vibration in his boots after the engines shut down. The Meteor had done what no Spitfire or Tempest could reliably do: catch a V-1 in the following weeks. The squadron learned fast. They practiced interceptions over Kent, chasing the flying bombs through cloud and smoke, using sheer speed and precision flying to flip them midair. Pilots described the shockwave of each detonation like being slapped by God. They came back with scorched paint, cracked canopies, and smiles that never quite reached their eyes. They weren't fighting enemy pilots anymore. They were fighting machines. And that, everyone realized, was the beginning of something far larger. By mid-August, the Meteor MKI received its cannons back for Hispano MKVs in the nose. The gun problems were solved, the aircraft now fully armed, but the men who flew it had already proven the point. Speed itself was a weapon. Germany's radar operators began reporting new British aircraft climbing faster than anything in the sky. Messerschmitt Me-262 pilots, the world's first German jet fighters, finally met their mirror image. But even the Luftwaffe's most experienced aces found it unsettling. The British jet appeared from nowhere, left no propeller blur, and vanished before they could lock on. The Meteor's first gun kills came on August 4, 1944, two V-1 South destroyed over Kent, but the larger meaning was clear to anyone watching from the ground. The jet age had arrived, and nothing in the world would ever be the same again. When Rogers filed his report that evening, he ended it with a single line: weapon effective, method unorthodox, recommend continuation. The Air Ministry stamped it. Approved for operational trials. No one yet realized that the experiment they had just authorized would rewrite every rule of air combat, not through firepower, but through velocity itself. By early September 1944, RAF Manston had become a strange kind of laboratory, half airbase, half experiment. The Gloucester Meteors, sleek and unnatural beside the curved-wing Spitfires, stood on the tarmac like machines from another war. Their twin-jet exhausts glowed faintly even when idling, heat distortion rising in shimmering waves above the airfield. Ground crews wore gloves to handle the fuselage. The metal stayed hot long after shutdown. The pilots called them the beasts when the first Meteors arrived. Most of the veteran Spitfire men dismissed them as unreliable novelties, machines that might burn more fuel than they flew. Yet by late August, that skepticism began to vanish. Squadron records showed that Meteor flights intercepted 39 V-1s in a single week, destroying 14 outright and forcing the rest into the Channel. London's civilian death toll dropped for the first time in months. Still, there were no victory parades, no headlines. The Meteor program was top secret. Only a handful of senior officers and engineers even knew it existed. Officially, the RAF credited improved gunnery and radar coordination for the success. The truth remained buried under the gray skies of Kent. At dawn on September 12, Flight Lieutenant Rogers and his wingman, Sergeant Eric Mick Wells, prepared for another scramble. The briefing was simple: V-1 South crossing Dover Line. Engage and destroy. The Meteor's engines shrieked to life. Twin columns of blue flame bent the air behind the aircraft as it rolled down the runway. Wheels up in 8 seconds. The climb rate was astonishing -3,000 feet in half a minute. At 8,000 feet, they spotted to V1 south and bound, moving northwest at 420 miles per hour. Rogers rolled inverted and dropped behind them. He aimed carefully, adjusting trim. The cannons fired, for Hispano MK versus hammering together, their shells streaking forward in incandescent arcs. The rounds connected. The first V1 exploded instantly, a sphere of orange and black that left a vapor ring expanding in the sunlight. The second began to dive. Wells swung left, his nose cannon tracking it. He fired one short burst and missed. The V1 leveled, its postjet coughing. He throttled forward, matching its speed, then reached the point of madness that had become almost normal for Meteor pilots. He moved in alongside the flying bomb, less than 20 feet away, and gently tipped it with his wing. It flipped once and vanished in a boiling cloud below. To destroyed, Wells reported calmly. On the ground, radar confirmed. Both contacts lost at sea. That afternoon, as Rogers filled his logbook, a courier jeep arrived from London carrying the single envelope marked "Most Secret Personal Delivery." Inside was a new order from Air Ministry Experimental Command, effective immediately. Meteor operations to expand to European theater. Objective: assess performance against piloted aircraft. Strict radio silence. No contact with enemy unless engaged. They were sending jets to France. At RAF Tangier, two Meteors were dismantled and loaded onto transport aircraft bound for Belgium. They were reassembled under armed guard at a captured Luftwaffe field near Brussels, known only as B-58. The smell of burned oil and concrete dust still lingered from recent bombing. For the first time, the jet age crossed the Channel. German reconnaissance spotted them within days. The Luftwaffe's intelligence bureau filed an urgent report to OKL headquarters. Enemy aircraft without propellers sighted near Brussels. Believed rocket-propelled. Extreme caution advised. The rumor spread fast. German pilots called it the Wissing Geth. The first unofficial encounter came on October 2, 1944. Weather over Holland was broken cloud at 10,000 feet, visibility fair. Rogers was leading a two-plane patrol when radar reported unidentified aircraft approaching from the east. Moments later, three Me-62s streaked overhead, silver flashes moving faster than anything the Allies had seen before. Both sides turned, climbing, for the first time in history. Jet met jet. The Meteor's controls stiffened in the thin air. Rogers pushed both throttles to full thrust. The Welland engines howled. His airspeed climbed past 430 miles per hour, then 440. The Me-262 ahead stayed level for a moment, almost taunting him, before banking left and diving. Rogers followed, closing slightly but still outmatched. The German jet was faster, cleaner, more refined, a Predator built for war, not experiment. But the Meteor could turn tighter. Rogers kept the enemy in sight, cutting inside his dive path. The German pilot, perhaps realizing the danger, broke off and accelerated east. Rogers fired to short bursts. The rounds vanished harmlessly into cloud. He watched the Me-262 disappear, the first brief duel of a new age that neither side truly understood. When he landed, his flight report contained one line: confirmed visual contact with enemy jet aircraft. Engagement inconclusive. It was the calm language of bureaucracy hiding a revolution. Back in England, Air Marshal Arthur Tedder read the dispatch and smiled thinly. So, he said to his aide, we've finally met them on equal terms. In truth, both sides were racing against time. The Germans produced fewer than 200 Me-62s that ever reached combat units. The Allies built only 20 operational Meteors before the war ended. But the implications terrified strategists. Propeller-driven fighters were already obsolete. Speed had become the new armor. By November, Rogers' squadron was flying daily patrols over liberated territory, mostly against retreating convoys. and the occasional V-1 sight still launching from hidden rails. They rarely saw enemy aircraft. The Luftwaffe was collapsing. Yet the orders were clear: keep flying, keep learning, record everything. One entry in the squadron diary from November 18th reads, "Engines steady at 10,000 feet. No vibration. Fuel burn high. Controls firm. Aircraft feels alive." Another, more cryptic, simply says, "This is not an airplane. It is the future." In early December, the Meteor Mk3 arrived, fitted with the Niederwent I engines, offering nearly 2,000 pounds of thrust each. For the pilots, the difference felt like crossing into another dimension. The Mk3 could reach 490 miles per hour and climb through cloud in seconds. It could catch or escape anything left flying over Europe. But for the first time, whispers of unease appeared in the engineering notes. Thermal stress increasing after prolonged throttle, one report read. Compressor surge during rapid descent. The technology was new, fragile, unpredictable. During one routine sortie near Eindhoven, a flameout struck mid-flight. The engine simply stopped, no sputter, no warning. Rogers managed to glide back, restart at 3,000 feet, and land safely. His report was simple: jet power reliable when respected, fatal when not. By winter's end, only a handful of meteors had ever fired in anger. Yet their existence changed everything. The Air Ministry circulated a confidential memo titled "Post-War Fighter Requirements." It mentioned no propellers at all. The piston age was ending quietly, invisibly, with no ceremony, replaced by a sound like tearing metal and wind. In the last days of 1944, as snow fell across Belgium, Rogers stood beside his aircraft on the hard stand. The engine heat shimmered against the cold air. He ran his gloved hand across the smooth skin of the fuselage. Still warm. Behind him, the war was still raging. But in front of him stood the outline of the next one. "They'll never laugh at the jets again," he said softly. And somewhere, far to the east, another German pilot, sitting in the cockpit of his Me-262, staring west into the gray sky, might have said the same. By January 1945, winter fog rolled over every RAF field from Manston to Brussels. The war was entering its last brutal months. Across the Channel, Germany was burning, its cities in ruins, its skies still dangerous. Yet inside cold hangars at airfields barely lit by blackout lamps, another kind of war was beginning, a war for the future of flight itself. The Gloucester Meteor squadrons were no longer a curiosity. They had become the testbed for a world that still didn't exist, running engines no one fully understood. Mechanics learned to keep buckets of sand near every startup. The jet exhaust could melt tarmac. Pilots wore asbestos gloves to check panels after landing. Each sortie ended with an engineer crawling under the fuselage with a flashlight, checking turbine blades for cracks invisible to the eye. And yet, despite the danger, they kept flying. At RAF Colerne, a new batch of Mk3 Meteors was being assembled, each fitted with the improved Derwent V engines, a leap forward from Whittle's original Welland design. The new turbines could sustain higher RPMs without tearing themselves apart. For the first time, the aircraft could hold 500 miles per hour in level flight. Flight Lieutenant Rogers was assigned to test one of them. The fuselage still smelled of hot oil and paint when he climbed in for his first flight of the year. The checklist was short, almost primitive. Fuel, check. RPM green. Ignition press. At 6:19 a.m., the new Derwents lit like twin furnaces. Flames lit from the exhaust for 2 full seconds before settling into a clean, shimmering jet of blue. The roar wasn't just sound, it was vibration through the bones. He took off into a sky still gray from morning frost. At 10,000 feet, he throttled forward. The airspeed indicator climbed past 470 miles per hour, then 480, but controls stiffened. The aircraft shuddered once, then smoothed out, slicing through the cold air like a blade. The sensation was unnatural, almost silent. It was as if the air itself no longer mattered. Control, Meteor 3 at altitude 12,000. Engine steady. She wants to run, and run she did. Back on the ground, engineers watched their stopwatches and pressure gauges, recording every tremor and temperature change. The data from those flights fed directly into Britain's post-war fighter designs, the Vampire, Venom, Canberra. Each borrowed a piece of what Rogers and his squadron discovered in the winter of '45. How to keep a jet alive in real air. But each discovery came at a cost. On February 3rd, Meteor E-229 failed to return from a test sortie. Witnesses saw it climb steeply, level off, then vanish into cloud. Minutes later, a fireball bloomed behind a ridge outside Gloucester. Investigators found turbine fragments embedded half a mile from the impact site. The compressor had disintegrated at 16,000 revolutions per minute, a world first in every terrible sense. Whittle wrote in his diary that night, "The engines are learning faster than we are. Despite the dangers, the program accelerated." The Air Ministry approved the first operational jet bomber escort mission on March 15, 1945. Objective: deter remaining Me-262 raids against Allied bomber streams over the Rhine. Four Meteors took off from Brussels under low cloud. Climbing to 25,000 feet, they carried only minimal armament, ammunition loads reduced to preserve fuel. At 26,000 feet, contrails arched above like white scars. German jets were out there somewhere, few in number, but deadly. At 9:47 a.m. radar picked up movement near Wessel. 3 Me-62s diving from altitude. Rogers led his section into a shallow turn, throttles forward. For 40 seconds the sky became a blur of silver shapes and condensation trails. No one scored a hit. None were lost. The Germans broke away, chased by speed itself. It wasn't victory by destruction. It was victory by survival. By April, as Allied troops crossed into Germany, the Meteor squadrons followed. They landed at captured airfields littered with wrecks of Me-62s and Arado 234 bombers. Evidence of an empire that had raced to the future and lost. Engineers walked among the twisted engines, noting design differences, metallurgy, airflow. Some took fragments back to England in wooden crates marked experimental samples. Rogers kept a small notebook filled with sketches and notes, turbine angles, intake diameters, compressor vanes. On one page, scrawled in pencil, were 6 words: "Speed is not the enemy." Ignorance is. In the final week of the war, his squadron received an order that felt almost ceremonial: patrol the skies above Denmark, ensure no Luftwaffe remnants attempted escape. The flight lasted 32 minutes. No contacts. When they returned to base, a radio operator was waiting with a message from London. Germany has surrendered. Cease operations effective immediately. Rogers taxied in, shut down the engines, and sat in silence as the turbines whined down from their shriek to a whisper. The sound faded into the wind. For the first time since 1939, Europe's skies were quiet. After the war, the Meteor's role changed overnight. The aircraft that had hunted flying bombs became a teacher. RAF pilots trained the next generation on it, men who would one day fly in Korea, over the Suez, and across Cold War Europe. The Meteor became the bridge between 2 centuries of flight. Rogers stayed on for a year as an instructor, teaching cadets how to handle throttle lag, flameouts, and the delicate balance between thrust and temperature. He told them, "Never fight the engine. Listen to it. It's alive." Whittle, now a national hero, visited the squadron in 1946. He stood beside one of the Meteors, its paint blistered from heat, and said quietly, "She isn't beautiful, but she's the mother of them all." By 1947, newer designs were already eclipsing the Meteor. Britain's Gloucester Meteor F4 and the American P-80 Shooting Star entered service worldwide. The jet race had become global, a contest no one could slow down. In museums decades later, visitors would see the first Meteor and call it primitive. But those who knew remembered something else. The smell of kerosene in cold air, the flicker of blue flame, the silence between the pulses of thrust, because before there was supersonic flight, before afterburners and radar locks, there was a wooden frame jet that fought robots over London, unarmed and untested, and won. In 1952, Rogers visited a small air show in Gloucestershire. A Meteor F-8 screamed overhead, climbing into the sun. Beside him, a child covered his ears and laughed. Rogers smiled faintly. The noise was deafening, but to him it was something else, the sound of progress. "That's what the future sounded like," he said. And in that moment, among the echoes of engines that had once terrified a continent, he realized the war had ended, but the age it created was only beginning.